Hello everybody and welcome to the final talk this afternoon. I'm delighted to introduce Wendy Shorter-Blake, Peter Pryce and Bill Amberg, who will talk about choosing materials consciously. Thank you.
Hello, yes, my name is Wendy Shorter-Blake. I'm Chairman of the Association of Master Upholsterers and Soft Furnishers. And I'm going to talk to you about upholstery filling materials and fabrics. And, sourcing materials that, can be reused and recycled and perhaps don't use quite so many chemicals as most furniture that you are buying contains. There is a government consultation out looking at the fire regulations for upholstered furniture, for domestic upholstered furniture. So everything in your house that you have all upholstered furniture, filling materials currently, if they are containing foam or they have been made post 1st of January 1950, has to have chemical treatment. That's the filling materials and the fabrics. So those filling materials might be chemically treated prior to being woven, or alternatively, they might be back-coated with a chemical treatment. The idea being that should there be an unfortunate fire, that those chemicals would reduce or delay the burn-in and effectively give you a little bit longer to get out of your house. The government consultation is aiming to reduce the amount of chemicals being used in filling materials and fabrics. But we are in desperate need for everybody and anybody to respond to a consultation because, as with most government consultations, they're never written the way you would hope, and they do have major implications. So through the Association of Master Upholsterers, majority of our members are reupholsterers. So, you've got a beautiful piece of furniture at home you want to keep, you bring it back to us, we can strip it down to the frame and we can start again reupholstering, we can refurbish it, we can just replace the fabrics. But that does have a knock-on effect. It does mean that, potentially you're going to have to use these fire-retardant chemicals in the materials that you are using. Alternatively, we can produce furniture that doesn't contain upholstered fire-retardant chemicals. Your traditional materials, if you look at some of the pieces over there that are exhibited with the Frederick Parker collection, traditional materials like coir fibre, hair, the hessians, the calicos, the wools. Wool particularly is inherent fire retardant. So if we are producing furniture, whether that be reupholstered or bespoke pieces, brand new bespoke pieces, potentially, we can produce furniture that doesn't contain any chemicals. If we are having to reproduce furniture that has foam in it, and an awful lot of the mass-produced manufactured pieces that you are buying and the furniture you are sitting on has foam in it, and that has to be chemically treated. The problem with that is every time you touch it, it is actually giving off dust. And that dust is getting into the flooring, you're picking it up, you're ingesting it, and particularly young children. So it's not good. And, government are trying to eradicate the use of chemicals, but that's not going to happen overnight because an awful lot of the furniture that we are producing is made with foam, and foam will burn, and it will burn rapidly. We can slow that burning process down by using a wool barrier cloth underneath the fabric. So again, we can reduce the amount of chemicals that are contained within furniture. But it is something that you guys need to really think about going forward, because as of the 1st of January this year, any upholstered furniture and fabrics fillings that needs to be disposed of can no longer go to landfill. It has to go to incineration. So government have already acknowledged that this furniture contains persistent organic pollutants. So, it is one of those things that, with the recycling, at the moment, you can't recycle. The pieces that you've got here, those chairs, these chairs we're sitting on, well, yours are plastic, but sorry, these with upholstery, these materials, if we take them off and we want to dispose of them, they have to go to incineration, can no longer go into landfill. From a practical point of view, when you guys come to want to reupholster furniture, we're obviously involved in lots of shapes. I keep looking at these, but then they're plastic. But if you look at some of the amazing pieces upstairs, there's amazing shapes. So you need pieces of fabric materials that you will manipulate well. And I think you're going to be talking about leather. Okay. So I'll leave that to this gentleman to talk about leather. One thing from an upholstery point of view, if you're going to be using leather, you do need to pull it very firmly, very hard, because otherwise it'll, start to seat and pull. Another very popular material, top fabric, are the velvet piles. And again, when you're choosing velvet piles, you need to think about its durability, because backsides on seats wear the fabrics down. And so most fabrics that you buy for upholstery have to go through the Martindale abrasion test. And what that does is it takes a sample of the fabric, puts it in a machine, basically rotates, counts the number of rotations to before it starts to break down to see how durable it is. From an upholstery point of view, domestic furniture, you're looking for something that will sustain at least 20,000 rotations. It's called the rub test, 20,000. Light domestic furniture, which is perhaps you're just going to stick it in the bedroom and, sit on it occasionally to put your shoes on and things, is 15,000. When you go up to more commercial stuff, like in here and pubs and bars, then you're going to go up the scale. But from a domestic point of view, what you should be doing is talking to customers and explaining to them that they need something that is really general domestic quality pieces. That can be a bit of a problem when it comes to velvet piles, because an awful lot of them are designer velvet piles, which is great. They've got a designer name to them. And I've been teaching upholstery for the past 24 years. And I often get students that will come in and say, I've got this lovely velvet from, a designer company. And I go, oh gosh, right, okay. Cut your fingernails, take all your jewellery off and buy yourself a steamer, because you're going to be damaging that pile all the time. So if you're working with upholstery, then you do need to think about, again, using a designated velvet pile that is suitable for reupholstery. And doesn't mean to say that, because it's cheaper, it's lesser quality. Sometimes, if you're working with designer names, you're paying an awful lot for that designer name and not necessarily for the quality of the piece in the first place. So would you like to now?
No, I think you've done a brilliant job. You've covered a lot of ground for me.
Sorry.
Which is fantastic. It's the perfect lead-in, so that's great. No, I think it's this gentleman, isn't it?
Yeah. Do you want me to carry on? Or?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Peter Pryce. I'm the senior mechanical design engineer at Colbrook Bossum Saunders. I know it sounds like a firm of solicitors, but it isn't. What we do is we make ergonomic office solutions, so monitor arms, laptop stands, CPU supports, to give people a better posture and better working environment, whether they be at home or in the office, which is very important. We've all suffered from pains in the middle of their back where we're sort of hunched over and everything. As a senior mechanical design engineer, my job mainly is to take the designs from our very talented product designers and then basically manufacture them. So we're designed for manufacture and designed for assembly. And those processes, we use finite element analysis to test for structure and strength of the components. We use a lot of plastics in their parts, so flow analysis, so we can tell how the material is going to flow through the tool, whether we can reduce that amount of plastic and we can reduce that cycle time. All their products are cycle tested, so we take charge of the testing, and I also liaise with their external suppliers, guys who are actually going to make the parts and assemble them and ship them to us, usually the Far East, but more and more now into Europe as well. I think really plastics had a lot of bad press over the years, and rightly so from a packaging point of view. It's not great, but plastic has been around a long time. Back to the 30s, I think nylon was first invented by DuPont. And, it's here to stay for a while. I mean, imagine a world where there's no plastics in the hospital, or in your motor car. I mean, a really good example of the car is an inlet manifold. Now they're moulded, whereas years ago they used to be aluminium. Well, aluminium's got a horrendous carbon footprint to manufacture that. And I think you've really got to look at, and in the furniture industry, I think the Panton chair is one of the classic sort of design icons that uses plastic. At one stage, it's still available today for 325 quid on the internet, and you can buy yourself one, help yourself. And I think it was actually sold by Herman Miller at one time as well. Classic piece of furniture. So I think you've got to think to yourself, well, why plastic? Well, plastic itself, you can get virtually any form you want. The colour, its durability, you can put a texture on it. And once you get into the investment for tooling and manufacture, it's low cost. You can make as many as you like as that for as long as that mould tool will last. And also with plastic, well, it's the maintenance side of things. It doesn't need treating with stains, it doesn't need dry cleaning. And as long as it's UV stable, it will weather really well. And I think really, as designers, when you look at plastics, you need to think about, do I go for a recyclable material or one with a recycled content in it? Materials with recycled content in them have done half your work for you, because you are actually using something that's already been moulded and then used again. I think with recycled materials, personally, just for an example, if I carry on, IKEA are really hot on having recycled content in their products, particularly PET and polypropylene. I think they've actually got a target for something like 2030 to virtually 100% recycled plastics in their products. So you need to think about, well, the material I'm choosing, do I go for 100% recycled material or a part recycled material? And when you look at that, you've got to think to yourself, well, am I going to get the properties from it? Is it going to be strong enough? Is it going to stand the test of time? Any chemical or UV resistance? And how easily is it going to be recycled again? Certain materials that have already contained recycled content are not suitable for further recycling, which could then bring you on to, well, do I go for a material that can be recycled, so a virgin material, if you like, and move on from there? And there's certain things that you need to think about from that standpoint. But it is like, are the materials in it compatible? For example, this sales pitch, the Oripura laptop stand, although that's two different materials bonded together, they are both polypropylene based, so that product can be 100% recycled, without any problem at all. Where you start to struggle with hybrid components, such as this part here, which has a nylon over-moulded onto a steel bolt, both those materials can be recycled, but it's really expensive to actually split the two apart and actually do something about it. And until that cost comes down, that is going to get largely left for landfill or whatever. So that's something you need to think about. And I think that leads us on as well quite nicely to, for example, a chair. Chair's a great example for furniture. You know, like these, you've got you've got the seat and you've got the legs. Well, these are steel and plastic, great. You can unscrew the two, recycle the parts, great. So think about design not only for assembly, but for disassembly. How easy is it going to be for your products to be taken apart to be recycled at a later date? You know, that's one of the big problems. It starts to get expensive to actually strip the parts down. It's going to get ignored, and I think you can do a lot to really push that side of things. And the use of snap fits as well and other plastic components. Of IKEA, I think it's the Odur chair, which is polypropylene, part recycled material, chair, base and legs all in one, and they actually clip together and held together with like a locking, almost a key that actually is the same material. So you can get the whole lot, just chuck it in and recycle the whole lot. So I think that's like a really important aspect, is how good it is to disassemble and how easy it is to assemble as well. The other thing, it's a small sort of manufacturing point really, but it's really useful if you can put material identification on your products. What plastic is that? And the date as well, because that helps recyclers tremendously.
So that's something that's coming up in the consultation document for use of the fire retardant chemicals, that they're going forward. They will be asking us as reupholsterers and manufacturers to produce labels that tell us what chemicals are in those pieces, so that at the end of life, when it goes to the waste disposal companies, they can work out what materials that they can recycle and what they can't. The problem we have at the moment with, if you've got a top fabric that has you know, a chemical or a synthetic material in it, obviously you can't break that down, so it'll have to go to incineration. There are polyester products that are coming through at the moment that are made with 80% plastic bottles, which is great, that's been recycled, but it cannot then be recycled again. If you've got a piece and you say that, you know, all the layers are broken down individually, you can split those up. But if they're combinations and they're glued together, it will just end up going to one incinerator and, you know, the whole thing being burnt. So.
Yeah, there's one other point I was going to come to from a designer's point of view, is what can you do to reduce the actual volume of material in your product? You know, take the chair seat, for example. Can I get away with a thinner wall section? You know, if you start with a 5mm wall section and get it down to 4mm, you just save 20% material. And you can do that by adding structural ribs in the right places, bosses, the form of the actual seat itself. If you introduce curves and dips to stiffen it up, you can do a lot with the actual physical design as well. But just to sort of round off really, there's been great advances in recycled materials. You know, recycled materials don't have the same properties as virgin materials, obviously. Yeah. They're not as good. So, you know, you're not going to want to use them in a medical device or, you know, anything that takes a lot of strength, take a lot of pressure. But it's getting better and better all the time. And one of their suppliers actually produces some containers, and this is, I think, this is 35% content of ocean-bound material. So, and these products, these materials are getting better and better all the time. And, you know, and they'll go more into packaging. Because, you know, where you need a really expensive product that needs to be held correctly, you know, like the corners of a table, we often see a plastic one. And I think that sort of product is getting more and more prevalent. Unfortunately, at the moment, they are expensive. And it will be you guys that sort of push to have these materials that drive the industry to go more down this route, and the cost will come down eventually. So,
yeah.
I mean,
you know, some of the foam companies are actually doing research into producing foams that are more organic. So, you know, from mushroom base, obviously at the moment, you know, it's extremely expensive, but as things move forward, hopefully those costs will come down so that we can reduce the amount of petrochemical products like foams and polyesters that we're using in our furniture. I'm very aware that we haven't really allowed you to say much.
I can't think of a good link for Bill. I need to say he's got a leather bookmark, and that's the only thing I can think of.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Amberg from Bill Amberg Studio. We are a studio based in Park Royal here in London, and we specialise in architectural installations, furniture, and product. And in leather, using a lot of leather. And it's been a passion for me for the last 40 years. Next year, it's my 40th year of the studio going strong. And we do a big variety of, as I say, furniture and product. And I've been asked to come and talk to you about using leather as a material in your furniture design. And it's been fascinating actually going around and talking to some of the people here and looking at what's on show and discussing with them their choice of materials. But one of the things that I thought, that the sadness, I think, was that there's a lot of misinformation around the use of leather and what is leather and why use leather and what are the properties of leather and is it a sustainable material? And a number of people who've come back and said, oh, I can't use leather because it's not sustainable, which is an interesting idea considering it's a byproduct of another industry. But we'll get onto that in a minute. I thought the other thing I would start with is just looking at the furniture upstairs. Pretty much all of it is made of wood. And I thought, okay, that's actually perhaps that's a good place to start from for this conversation. And I really encourage you to come and talk to us afterwards or ask any questions that you may have. We really encourage that. So I was thinking, why are people using wood? And what is it about wood that's interesting? And it kind of struck me that they are repairable, it's reusable, it's recyclable, and it has a fantastic afterlife. All of those properties are very, very similar to leather. It's sustainable, you would think. Wood is sustainable, and yet you cannot argue that the monoculture forestry farming of wood is a disaster. So there's a whole element of using wood and growing wood that's going to cause an ecological problem going forward. There's also lots of different types of wood. Would you consider using MDF or would you consider using plywood? They're still wood, but they're full of hideous resins and they're very, very bad for the environment. They don't have that repairable, reusable, recyclable benefit. But it's a different type of wood. So it kind of makes me think that a lot of this thing is about sourcing. It's about sourcing good materials from the best possible places is the key to any really beautiful product that you're designing and making. And that sourcing, the fundamentals of sourcing is about your information. And information is about education, self-educating yourself, and therefore research. So before you start talking about anything or thinking about anything, do your research for your raw materials really, really thoroughly. And really try and understand, find the most appropriate material for your project. So kind of how does that relate to wood? How does wood relate to leather and how do they interthink? So I think it's very fair to say that we all, as a globe, overeat meat. You know, there's vastly too many cattle being grown on our land and being fed the wrong sorts of food. And there are lots of similarities there with with pasture animals that are grown on a pasture and eat grass and are grass-fed pasture animals, or you have the alternative, which is a feedlot animal that never sees the light of day, is pumped full of hormones, and is given the wrong sort of food to eat. There are two different types of cattle, and they're producing two different types of skin, and therefore two different types of leather. And if you've done your research, you'll be able to properly work out which of those two materials you want to use. So you've got the same thing there with the wood. You've got regenerative agriculture on one side, which is the growing movement of regenerating farmland, thinking about the soil. And then you've also got industrial agriculture on the other hand, where you pump the land full of nitrogen and pesticides to grow your crop. Now, I know which one I prefer, and I think that ultimately you guys probably do as well. And I think that as governments and bodies change and peoples change, we will move definitely in the regenerative agriculture direction. And that, I think, gives us the answer in terms of where does the future for materials lie? Is it in technology? Is farming about technology or is farming about biology? And I would say probably about biology. It's about feeding the soil and regenerating the land that we have. And all of that involves animals. It's fundamental to regenerative agriculture is to have herbivores wandering around on the land, eating the grass and shitting everywhere and pissing everywhere and tramping on the ground and carrying seeds around. That's really, really fundamental to the food we eat and the wood that grows up out of the ground. So we need those animals. So therefore, what are we going to do with them? We're going to eat all of them, and we're going to use up every last bit of them in the best possible way we can. The value of a skin. Does anybody know the value of a skin of a standing animal? When I hear people say that animals are killed for their, cows are killed for their skin, utter nonsense. Absolute nonsense. Do anybody know what the value of the skin of an animal is, of a cow standing in a field? No, just the value of it to the trade. Nothing. Yeah, 1%. So nobody's going to grow an animal and kill it for 1% of its value. So it's nonsense. So there's a lot of facts that you guys need to kind of start to understand, I think. And that's just a perfect example of how there is this great misinformation around a material. In the same way as tanneries, the same way that food, saying that food is it's very easy and glib to say food is a byproduct of the industry, of another industry, but tanning is absolutely a perfect example of why it's a byproduct. Because the best tanneries grow up around food types. So the tanneries that we use, we probably only use 8 or 10 tanneries in Europe. They're getting pasture-fed animals from Europe. And even in Europe, you see this localization of food types leading to tannery types. So the best calf skins in the world come from France because they eat the most veal. The best buffalo skins come from southern Italy because they're making mozzarella. Heavy leathers, northern Europe, because we eat lots of beef. So that is how tanning has come. Tanning is the oldest continual industrial process to mankind. There are tanning sites in France that are 30,000 years old. And there's a very good reason for that, because it's incredibly strong. It's incredibly strong. It's still the strongest upholstery material that we can use. There's a good reason why it's used on planes and in trains and in cars, and that's because it lasts much, much longer than any other material. So if you want to make a piece of furniture that your family are going to enjoy, your grandchildren are going to enjoy, and you want to upholster it, think about upholstering it in leather. But when you think about leather, be careful about the leather choice that you make, because there's a hell of a difference between a feedlot farm cattle skin that comes from Brazil that's been fed on soya and a fabulous skin that comes from, Dorset that's been wandering around the field eating clover all day. They produce different skins, and you can tell the difference very, very clearly. The same with the tanning process. There's a lot of dirty tanneries out there. Sure, if you go to Bangladesh, sorry to name names, but if you go to Bangladesh, there's some really unregulated, shocking tanneries. If you go to the Amazon and you take their hardwood from the Amazon, you're committing the same kind of crime. It's no different. If you go to your woodland in Dorset and get your coppiced oak, that's fantastic wood. You should be using that. And in the same way as you choose your materials of your wood materials, you should be choosing your leather materials. It's an extraordinary material that has got all of these properties that you enjoy about using. But that's not even to say, I don't know how many of you actually make furniture here, physically make it. But if any of you played with leather as a material and actually start to work with it, it's also a beautiful material to work with. It's very sympathetic. It really does what you want it to do. It really gives back. And it's for craftsmen, it's a fantastic material to work with. I'm going to leave you with that, I think. But do please ask any questions. If any of you are ever thinking about using leather, I'd be actively encourage you to come to the studio. It's only in Park Royal. You know, get my details and come over and have a look, and we can talk about your projects and whether you want to use leather or not.